So we have this incredible timeline of these words from maybe 500 BC through the centuries and still resonant today. And then another book that I'll just show you quickly. This is the Esther and Vashti. And this was the first book I started and the last one I finished. A friend sent me the children's version of the Purim story. And I began it, I had lots of triangles. And then I put it away. I thought, it's not enough. But then after reading more and more of the Bible and reading the book of Esther, it's a much more complex story. And so it's much more than the Jews must leave. And on the back is the real story. And I was Googling ancient Persian gallows and knives and swords. And both women, Vashti, the king's first wife, and then Esther, both women in their time knew the consequences and spoke out. So I like both of them. So I learned so much. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, so my work is over here. My name is Sandy Weisman. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Nancy, for having us here. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. It's really amazing. I'm used to South Thomas. When I heard the theme, I've never done anything on Jewish women or Hebrew women, I would say. More specifically, but I come from a very religious family, and I grew up going to religious school, not Hebrew school, but religious school. And the people in the Bible were like fairy tales to me. You know, we read them, we liked them, you know, we cheered for them in Sunday school. But I had no clue who they were or where they fit into the grand story of the development of the Hebrew nation, or this first monotheistic religion come to life. So my first job was to research, and I started out with a timeline, trying to figure out where does Miriam fit in, what happens to King David, where does it all go together, and a map that helped me understand that if indeed there was an Abraham and Sarah, they traveled hundreds of miles with their tents and their camels and their sheep and their goats. And it was a huge migration that they were involved with till they got to Canaan, which is where God told them to go. So that was the first. I went to the rabbi in Rockland, and I talked with her a bit. And I said, do these women really exist? Do we know that? Because there's no recorded history. And she said, does it matter? Because somebody like Miriam existed. Somebody in the world was in that position of living in Egypt and had been enslaved and now needed to leave. We know that that is part of the story. So it didn't matter to me so much that particular woman was Miriam, but the story stood in for all the Miriams for me. So that was my research. These books cover about 1,000 years in history, Sarah being the first, the matriarch, and Sheba being the queen. You know, so we come from an agrarian society of growing grain and all of that, and making tents and moving to somebody who's now in Jerusalem and living in I don't know how elaborate it was, but living in a real building. So that was an interesting timeline for me. You see on almost all the books except Bathsheba, a little figure appears here and there, and that is, there's a little amulets for Asherah. The women didn't really like that God was a man and that God had no wife. And so that was, they were allowed, apparently, from everything I've read, to pray to Asherah for children, for comfort. And she was called God's wife. And then by the time of King David, that was not allowed anymore. So it was an interesting thing. I had no idea that was something new I learned. So when we all first met, Miriam, I'll talk about her in a minute. When we all met for the first time, I said, I have my research question. What did Sarah do all day? She was 90 when she had a baby. But I did really learn a lot. Well, first of all, she and Abraham were moving all the time, but the tents were hand woven out of goat hair. So somebody was weaving, so I was sent off from my goat hair to Minnesota. I got my goat hair and I borrowed a spinning wheel, and I started spinning. And then I learned that they were grinding grain 3 hours a day for every 4 people in their family. So that was a huge, huge task. So the spinning and the weaving and the grinding, that took up your day. And if you had kids, that was the rest of your day, I guess. So, it was really, really hard work at the beginning. Well, it was hard work. Period. So I got really into the idea that what I wanted to capture was the texture of the women's lives. What were they doing all day? What were they making? What were they responsible for in terms of baking and feeding and helping the family survive? And of course, they were trying to build a society, a culture, a tribe. So having babies was really, really important. And so it was definitely the force that was driving them. So I'll just show you a couple of books. I just want to thank my friend Barbara. Barbara helped me with the embroidery and also the pushing on Bathsheba. I felt this was just one idea of materials. I don't know if Miriam ever embroidered, but it was interesting because sitting and spinning and weaving, I had done that before a long time ago, and that felt really comfortable. And I remembered how long it took to do those things. The idea of you need 7 spinners for every weaver to have enough yarn to go. And imagine these tents, big rooms. The whole family stayed in a tent. So you got one tent basically. Maybe if you were newly married, you got a tent. But after that, it was patching your tent. So it was weaving all the time in your clothes. So, but then as we were sitting embroidering, Barbara and I said, this, this isn't helping us to survive, right? But they would have been observing Egyptian women clothing, the elaborate headdresses or maybe bodices. And so Barbara and I sat there doing our embroidery and trying to feel what that might have felt like to have the time to do the embroidery. I don't know how it worked, but so that was my Miriam. And the other book I'll show you is Deborah. Deborah's an interesting character. She was the only female judge. And to be a judge, you had to be a warrior. So she wasn't a warrior. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. There's no mention of children with her. I did give her a little Ashera in case she wanted children. I'm not sure. And I thought, well, what would stand in for Deborah? And I thought, she's got to go into battle. She's got to kill the Canaanite army with her folks. And I thought, well, I guess the thing that she really needs is God. And so, I'll show you, where is it? So I created a book out of God's breath. What else? So this is my take on God's breath. It happens to be gunpowder, which I live. So I was trying to create a really smoky, I'm here. So that's my take on Deborah. And after that, it was just really fun because trying to capture a quality of materials. I wanted to touch the same things they were touching, and that came true for me. I felt like I really understood what their lives were. Mine really, had involved with it. So.
What a privilege privilege to be here with all of you and work with Nancy again and Lissa again. When Lissa invited me, I said yes right away because it was Lissa. And because it meant I could be here, which would make me close to Nancy again, who used to represent me years ago at Davidson and Daughters. And then I started to think about it and to do research, and I got just so far. I knew I wanted to do something about Rebecca and the camels, and I'd never drawn camels before, so I did go down to the York Wildlife Kingdom, but I didn't call first. And the camel had already left the Florida. So my camels are not as perhaps well informed as someone who's actually been in the presence of a camel. And I also have always had an interest in Lilith, not only because I was at a very young age feminist, staging rallies at my high school and not going to class and so forth till there were equal rights. It's 2022. We still don't have an ERA in this state. Amazing. So I started to read more about Lilith, and that took me to a lot of Jewish feminist scholars' writings. That was really interesting. And then I ended up looking at incantation bowls that were made out of clay with her image inscribed on them. And then the concave side of the bowl was placed against the soil, and a building was built on top of that to keep Lilith from entering the house. Well, those bowls are beautiful. I've never seen one in person. This is all research, so I'm just seeing them in books. And there's some kind of cross between Ra's chast and some other very primitive mark making. They were stunning. So then I decided I would make 5 circle books about Lilith, because the bowls and the imagery was really inspired by what was already on those incantation bowls. And I started to think, well, if I were restricted to the night, if I'd been kicked out of Eden because I wouldn't do what Adam said, and I happened to be in the nighttime, what would I get up to? And I thought, oh, I'd be an astronomer or a mermaid, and so on and so on, so, or a poet. So I started to a house cleaner. I need to clean house. So I started to come up with this imagery, and I started to feel, as a poet, I was thinking I would write, which is something I'm not afraid to do. But it felt inauthentic, giving voice to this woman. So I contacted someone I'd never met, a stranger who lives in Westbrook named Anna Robel. And I asked her if she would come in on that project with me, and I sent her all my drawings and all my notes, and we had this excellent long phone conversation. She was all in and loved the idea, loved Lilith, and she's also a history scholar, so I really struck it rich. And then after we finished that poem for the Lilith poet book, I had this stack of notes for my pop-up book of hospitality, and I asked her if she would work on those, and would she be willing to do my table of contents for me, and she said she'd tackle that. So she added a sense of humor and history that I hadn't expected. I was so happy to have her tighten that up, and she insisted that we call it the pop-up Bible of hospitality, and I liked the courage there. So that was an extraordinary thing for me to invite someone I'd never met. But and when I looked her up first online, the first thing I found was a poem she'd written and that had been published in Lilith magazine. So, but I ended up with a friend. So if that's one reason to say yes to a show you're not sure how you fit into, then I would say that was a big bonus for me, was making a new friend. And then the fourth piece, these are all out in the hall, are is about paradise with a main filter. And I've been thinking about, before Lissa invited me, I've been thinking about taking everyday birds in Maine, blue jays, etc., chickadees, and giving them paradise feathers as if they were in that family. So I had that idea. I hadn't worked on it. I hadn't actually made any images, but I've been thinking about it, and I went to Bowdoin and did some research on other images of birds of paradise that are in their special collections in the library. So I've been on that track, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a 21st century paradise Maine for Eve. So that was my thinking, and the research kind of was happening all at once, and the books were getting finished in different stages. Very unlike me, I usually edition work. I might get 2 or 3 books done in a year, with maybe 5 or 10 of those books in the edition. But this past year was one-of-a-kind books.
Hello, my name is Lee-Zimerle, and my work is behind you guys. I guess, I don't know, I wasn't prepared as much as like talking individually, but I can kind of sum it up and tell you how I came up with the body of work that you see here. So when I was asked to do this project with, 4 other ladies, I was intrigued, but yet scared because I'm not Jewish, first of all. So like for me to kind of tap into a religion that I don't really familiar with, that was a little nerve-wracking. But so for a few months, I just read and looked it up, researched, but none of the stories really I don't know, they were interesting, but I never really came up with the idea, oh, this is where I want to go. So then I had to step back and kind of think about what I do as an artist, first of all. So for me, when I do my art, it's all about me. So instead of, I guess, approaching how the woman in the Bible were kind of portrayed, I had to put myself in that position, if that makes sense. And then ideas start to come alive, and I was very excited as I was working on this. So when I was looking at, obviously, the book of Ruth, where they literally lost everything in their journey, but then she comes out at the end, so I don't know, triumph. So for that, obviously my life has never been that difficult, but I do think with my journey of this half of my life that I lived, hopefully I'll live another half. There are a lot of trials and whatnot that I feel that I had to burden and kind of fight for as a woman and as an artist and as a minority. So I started to kind of portray the beautiful, I guess, the field that was portrayed in the Bible and the story, but yet, how do I show the beauty of my life going here and there? So the roses kind of started to come blooming in pages. And at the end, I kind of wanted to fill the whole page with colors and, the beauty. So obviously it's ongoing because my life isn't over yet, but kind of wanted to portray that idea. And I wanted to talk about, I guess, Eve. This was one of the earlier ones that I started working on. I had to step back after creating the book because I felt like the book wasn't enough. So then I started to work on the paper doll. I don't know if you guys remember seeing that, but if I can't get this right. Let me see. I'm gonna try to do this. Yeah. I'll get up for this one.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is a Jacob's ladder, structure. So for book art, they will know. It's very playful. So even though, obviously, again, the story of Eve is miserable, in my opinion. You know, she was crushed. You know, I wanted to kind of approach it in a playful way, and then her being kind of like the very first woman, right, that was introduced. I wanted to kind of put myself in there as an Asian woman. So when you look at those little dolls that I made, I kind of put that my tradition of Korean background and culture kind of in there as a woman of, you know, like who is trying to, I guess, survive in this world. But again, in a way that people can approach and kind of identify, not only because obviously like they don't have to be exactly the same journey that I'm going through, but I'm sure individually as a woman, you probably have, you know, encountered something that you always thought, oh, this is kind of difficult and hard, but yet you gotta take it somewhat, you know, like positive and lightly. So I wanted to kind of play that around with the child kind of mindset. And as a child, I don't think I am as much now, but I was very girly girl. So I love dolls, I love Barbies and paper dolls. And my mom couldn't afford to buy Barbies all the time. So Barbies were like Christmas or like, I don't know, my birthday. But then every other occasion, if we were going to the store, like if I was whining about, oh, get me a doll, like she couldn't afford the doll, but she'd be like, okay, I can get you this paper doll because there are only a few cents, you know? So I remember that memory, yeah. And I guess lastly, I can kind of talk about, because a lot of people did ask me about the sleepless nights. So I didn't bring the cover, but maybe, I don't know, I'll show you after we're done with the talk, but I kind of created kind of like an envelope coverage. So when you look at the other side, that flower bed, it becomes like 4 closer kind of an envelope. So when a person get to look at it, they have that intimate moment of opening up that envelope. And I kind of approached it in that way because when it comes to, I don't know, for everyone, especially I want to say for mothers and wife and, you know, women, like sleep is precious, right? And I have 2 very active sons. I mean, now they're teenagers and they don't want to even talk to me, but at the same time, they don't drive. So whenever their activity comes or any, they have to rely on me and I have to give up my time and energy to do everything for them. So it's like, everything stops from my schedule to help them out, if that makes sense, right? So, and then as an artist, I think we all share it for if you're an artist, like I don't get to make my work or have my time of studio time until everyone is in bed, you know? Then that's the only time you actually have time to like concentrate and focus and make art. So then as they get older, I realized when they were little, like their bedtime was at 8 p.m., you know? Like, as they get older, now their bedtime is like 11:30, almost like midnight. So it's crazy how much I had to sacrifice my time of sleep at the same time, right? So I kind of played that around with the life of Sarah, because from the beginning, her, you know, she wanted a one thing, having a child, right? And she couldn't have it. And then she does some horrible, in my opinion, can't even think about keeping, I don't know, her maid, right? It's like to her husband so they can have children together. To me, that's just like, I can't believe a woman will do that. Like, I can't even imagine. So I was thinking, even though her, you know, it says it very briefly, they don't really go into her mental stage, but I can only imagine how much struggle and mentally hurt and like, you know, like she was through her life. So I wanted to kind of like play that idea of we may look fine from the outside and we smile and you know what I mean, but you just don't know what's, you know, behind our doors. So I wanted to do that.
Oh, wow. So I'm Jessyca Broekman. My work is in that corner, bands and the long pieces. Yeah, I said yes right away, and thank you, Alyssa, for inviting me. But I had a lot of reservations. I didn't know anything about these stories. I didn't know anything about these women. Like me, Bible stories, really? What am I gonna do with this? But it turned out to be a really interesting challenge, and I approached it by setting myself onto 2 tracks at the same time. The first was doing the research, looking into the women, reading about them, reading the stories, and seeing who they were. And while I was doing that, I was also in my studio playing, like just folding and finding new ways to fold paper and new ways to construct books, and just making stuff simultaneous to no idea how these 2 roads were going to converge, but I just knew that was what I was doing. So a few things struck me at the research stage that, first of all, the women are not that well described. They are either beautiful or not, and they either beget children or not, and preferably sons. And I thought, well, in my experience, women are a whole lot more than that. And then I started to realize that they really moved history forward. They were the movers and the shakers, and yet they weren't getting a lot of credit for that. And but the way they were doing that was almost always in a clandestine way. It was always behind the scenes. It was hiding themselves, hiding their actions, hiding their desires. Everything was behind a veil. And I thought, this is not unlike women today. We still hide so much of ourselves and so much of what we do. And, I was just really struck by that. So that led me to, well, these stories, you may not know these stories, but man, they have a huge impact on your life today. Like we are still living by these rules. How is that possible? So those were the 2 sort of realizations. And then while I'm doing that, I'm folding away, and I'm doing all these different kinds of folds and turning them around. I'm like, oh, well, that kind of looks like a 10. Maybe I'll make 10s. Oh, there's another one. Oh, gee, let's see, what could I do with that? And then one day, I went like this. I was like, oh, yeah. There we go. Now we're talking. Yeah. I got a fan, and that was on my way. So then I started making fans for the individual women, and thinking about each of their stories and who they were, how they were presented, and making fans for them. These are extras, these are prototypes, but this is just an example. The other thing that I really loved about these kinds of folds, these are non-parallel folds. So they form in all these different ways. And you guys didn't get the gist of this. This is like little tent-like structure. Right? And then, oh, look at that. It's a hand. So there's all these different combinations, and every time you change any measurement, if it's a taller piece, a longer piece, if you make the angles bigger, less big, everything about it changes. And so I realized it's like the infinite ways women are women. There's an infinite way to make these fans. So each one of these is a unique set of folds to make a fan. So that's that group. And then there's a group of work over here that are what I call the long arc of history and hidden in folds. And some of those are pieces that if you actually extend one of them all the way together, it's about 10 feet long. And that is representative. Lisa, I wouldn't try. Yeah. They're hard to fold and unfold because they're so long and uneven. But you know, that for me was representative of this lineage and the way that there is a direct line from these stories to how we live now, how women are viewed, how we're expected to behave. And a lot of people ask me about the lettering. It's there are Hebrew letters on there. There was a line in the book of Esther that is about something to the effect of Esther did not reveal who she was. And for me, that was the essence of what I was trying to get at. So I took that line and I repeated it. I made a digital file of it and repeated it multiple times so that then I could make a plate and print it. And then I also printed the names of the Hebrew names of the women. And again, I made like a collage of all their names and printed that. So that's what the lettering is in the background of those pieces. Is that, you know, and then there's all the little teeny tiny folded pieces in between the folds are just representative of all the stories and all the stories we hold and the memories and the ways we get where we are today. And so that, and then the extra pieces, women, we get the job done. That's just, I don't need to say more about that. So, that's it.
We've all been working together for a long time, and half of this I haven't heard in this story. It's been a while, a lot of people have been standing. Does anybody have a question for the group as a whole or something? And then we'll all stay around and you can talk to individuals if you have questions about their work. But does anybody have a question that is burning to be asked and answered?
How long did some of these projects take? I mean, when did you start this? You said that, but I missed
It's a year ago. About a year
for most of
Yeah, and everybody was incorporating this work and other work they were doing, and children and jobs and all of those things as well. And Annie Bowman. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm curious if there was one particular woman, maybe it's for each of you, that for a biblical woman that resonated with you. Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah.
Anybody else have one?
I wouldn't say, I had one, she did, it wasn't that she resonated, but that her story struck me as she's the one, and it was Tamar. And what's interesting about that for me is the way I read the story, and I had a book that, I contacted a rabbi that is an old friend of my sister's, and I said, you know, I don't know where to look, because a lot of what I'm reading are Christian texts. I can tell they're not from a Jewish perspective, and I want the Jewish perspective. And she pointed me in the direction of this book that was specifically about the women and had been written, I believe, by a rabbinical scholar. And the way that the Tamar story is told, or the way I interpreted it, is that Tamar took charge, and she went and disguised herself as a harlot on the side of the road. And she seduced her father-in-law so that he would do the right thing. That's the encapsulated version. And I was talking to a friend who's a minister, a Christian minister, and I told her my interpretation, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting. We call it the rape of Tamar." The what? The rape of Tamar. And here I had interpreted, you know, like, well, no, Tamar actually orchestrated this whole thing. You know, she wanted to get pregnant by this guy. She wanted that child, and she wanted to, you know, do this. So when I read that, I thought, go Tamar, like, use it, baby, you know. And I just thought she was like on fire, you know. So she's the big red fan. So I didn't. She didn't resonate with me, but she brought it all together. Thank you.
Any other questions? So the two pieces that are hanging up here, the larger square is based on two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who were at the time of Miriam and Moses and being in Egypt, and they had been commanded to kill all the Hebrew babies. And they did not. They are the subversives and said, nope, you know, we fear God more than we fear Pharaoh. And so I didn't really know what to do with that. It's like, you know, so I had this beautiful, it's funny, my studio got cluttered with fabric from Latvia and goat hair from Minnesota and, you know, these little drum heads from somewhere else, it's a goat, you know, I was just into all the materials. But I thought, well, the midwives would need cloth, you know, what I could do for them was give them a lot of cloth to do their work and they would keep wrapping those babies and keeping them safe. So that was sort of my tribute to her. Ayala was a little racier. She was a tent maker, so there's a lot of goat hair and spun goat hair and weaving inside of that book. And it's hung by a tent peg. And when Deborah, when her army beat the Canaanite army, they didn't kill the general. And so the general wandered into where Ayala was staying in her tent. And he said, "Can I have some water?" And she said, "Sure, come on in. And I'll make you some milk." And so she warmed milk up. This is what the story says. And he lays down and he falls asleep and she takes her tent peg and right through the sleeping temple. So I like the subversive.
What she's not describing.
Yeah.
Go forward.
I just wanted to ask a favor. I have a new blog and I'm going to write about this afternoon. And I just wanted to see if I could stand up here and get a picture of all you 5 ladies together. I really enjoyed this. And it's been informative. Non-Jewish person. Also, so let me get a pen and paper. Well, hold on. Oh, okay. Okay.
Just first row. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay, I have a request that when this is finally over, that if people quietly and in a very organized way would bring their chairs to me here, we could clear this room out quite quickly and then you could really enjoy this. Okay, thank you so much and thank you for your patience.